You are listening to Historyman, a platform for historians, authors, and museum directors to tell their stories of the American Revolution, walk in the footsteps of heroes, and proclaim Frredom Reigns. On today's episode, we are with Steve Sudderth, the author of Trails Through Time, A History of the Blowing Rock Area. Welcome, Steve.
Glad to be here.
Steve, we have done several episodes, and I have been on the edge of my seat through the whole thing. But we're kind of doing an overview of your book. This certainly doesn't cover everything in your book, but these are some cool stories that come from the Blowing Rock area. And I know our listeners would love to know how they can get a hold of your book. So where would they get your book?
My book can be purchased online at steve-sudderth-books.square.site, or they can purchase it locally at the Blowing Rock, Sunset Teas in Lenoir at the Caldwell County Heritage Museum, at Wilkes County Heritage Museum in Wilkesboro, and in Boone at Deerfield Pharmacy or Footsloggers.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. Steve, we've done several episodes about this area. We started off kind of like with an overview of your book, the overview of this area. We went all the way back to the 1400s. My goodness, I don't know how we did that, but we came up into the Proclamation line. We talked about the different groups of people that formed the over the mountain region, the Watauga region of Revolutionary War fame. And then we started talking about the different forts in this area. And we talked about Jimmy Blair and Martin Gambill being the Southern Campaign Paul Revere's of this area, and how they, Martin especially, went through, two horses died under him as he was going through the backcountry here, warning the settlers, calling them to arms. We know that Jimmy Blair was actually shot during that time where he was trying to warn everybody. But now we come through Kings Mountain. They were actually warning everybody that Ferguson was coming up into the area, and it was the precursor to Kings Mountain. Now, after Kings Mountain, all the prisoners from Kings Mountain coming back through this area, correct?
Yes.
And they're kind of taking off right and left and escaping away from the Patriots, who are just as tired as the prisoners are in many respects. Tell us some of those communities where you know that they escaped and ran back through. Where are some of those communities in this area?
Nancy Alexander, in her book, Here Where I Dwell, she wrote that as they were marching the prisoners from Kings Mountain, and they were to end up in Bethabara or Winston-Salem area with the Moravian settlement. They had a prison there, or Salisbury. And as they were marching the prisoners through, a lot of them escaped, and I think only 300 actually made it to the prison camp. A lot of them died. A lot of them escaped. And one night, the people of what's now Caldwell County, when they had the prisoners in the Patterson area near Fort Defiance, they felt sorry for them because they were eating green corn and just anything they could because they didn't have anything to eat. And so that was as close as those prisoners from Kings Mountain actually got to Blowing Rock, about 14 miles away. The only battle that was ever fought in what's now Watauga County that we know of happened in 1781, April of 1781.
So this is well past Kings Mountain.
Yeah.
This is actually past Cowpens,
yeah,
right? So
correct.
We're talking
After Guilford Courthouse.
Yeah, it's after Guilford Courthouse. We're talking Cornwallis has actually turned northeast. He may have gone down to Wilmington and headed northeast, and finally meets his match and gets surrounded at Yorktown. But we're talking about April 1781. You still have Patriots here, and you still have Tories here, right?
That's right. It was really a civil war in the backcountry of North and South Carolina. It was neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother. It was truly a civil war. That's why Cornwallis tried so hard to develop, and that's why he brought Ferguson in, because Ferguson could actually communicate with the militia, and he built the militia up to like 4,000 troops at one point before his defeat and death at Kings Mountain.
So Nathaniel Greene, who was over the Continentals at that time and had met Cornwallis at Guilford Courthouse, he went back down to South Carolina.
Correct.
So now we just have militia on either side at this point in this community, right?
Yes.
Wow.
And Benjamin Cleveland, Mr. Roundabout, came down from Virginia before the war, and in the community of Rondon, just between Elkin and Wilkesboro, built a large plantation.
Which community was it?
Rhonda, Rhonda. And they called him Old Roundabout because he was a big man. He was physically big, like 300 pounds. And he built up quite a plantation there. And he became a colonel of the Wilkes County militia. And he was brutal. As bad as the Tories were, he matched them. He was very rough. Why do they call them? Cleveland's Bulldogs?
Cleveland's Bulldogs, Cleveland's Devils. I mean, they were...
Depending on which side you were on.
A force to be reckoned with, that's for sure.
That is true. And if you were a Tory and you could get at Ben Cleveland, you were going to. And that brings us to April 15th, 1781, 14th and 15th, 1781. Ben Cleveland had a cattle farm, Old Fields, and that's probably where James Blair met Martin Gamble at Cleveland's Old Fields, which is in the Deep Gap section of along the New River on the Watauga, Ashe County border. On the 14th, Ben Cleveland arrived at his cattle farm. A loyalist captain, William Riddle, learned that he was going to be there. Riddle stole one of Cleveland's horses and then laid an ambush for him. And Colonel Cleveland, or Ben Cleveland, and a fellow by the name of Richard Calloway began searching for the horse. And Captain Riddle and his men opened fire. Calloway didn't have any guns, according to the story, and Cleveland only had 2 pistols. Calloway was shot in the thigh, and Cleveland grabbed a woman at a house there, a lady by the name of Abigail Walters. And he used her as a shield until Riddle promised he would ransom Ben Cleveland and not kill him. That must have been quite a negotiation.
Must have been.
At that point, Calloway and Cleveland were taken to a place called Wolf's Den, right outside the Todd community on Highway 194 between Boone and Todd. There's Riddle's Knob. And this place, Wolf's Den, got its name because the last wolves that were hunted out of this area was about 1825. What they would do is they wanted to keep getting pelts. So there was a she wolf that used that den to birth her litters. And they would let the litters get big enough, then they would go harvest the wolves for their pelts, but they'd leave her alone. And that's why it was called the Wolf's Den. And to this day, this place is called Riddle's Knob. Anyway, that was William Riddle's hideaway. Richard Calloway's brother, Joseph, learned from somebody, probably the Walters, that the 2 men had been captured. And he went looking for Ben Cleveland's brother, Robert. And they assembled some of Ben Cleveland's militia, and then they went off in pursuit. At some point, I think this Calloway got away and actually led them to this. I'm not sure, that the stories get kind of scratchy together. But anyway, however Ben Cleveland's men found it, they found where they were holding Ben Cleveland. And this is a story that makes the most sense to me, that Calloway escaped and that they found where he was at. And Riddle had told Cleveland that he wanted a bunch of safety passes signed by him so his men could more easily move about. And Cleveland was sitting on a log, and you imagine a 300-pound man sitting on a log writing out these passes. And supposedly at the time that Cleveland was writing his final pass, the Patriots had surrounded the Loyalists and opened fire on them. And Cleveland rolled behind the log, and they just wounded one man. But Riddle and all of his Loyalist men had escaped. They were later captured, and there were 3 of them that were captured: William Riddle, a man by the name of Reeves, and a man by the name of Goss. And they were taken to Wilkesboro, where Ben Cleveland tried them, and presiding over the court. Of course, they were found guilty, and they were hanged from the Tory Oak. And later, 2 other Loyalists, a Cowles and a Brown, were also hanged that day for stealing horses. And the Tory Oak is in front of the old Wilkes Courthouse, which is still there today, and they're using it as a Wilkes Museum.
Wow. Wow. There's a subsequent story, or a side story, about a free black gentleman who served in Cleveland's Devils by the name of Ishmael Titus, who supposedly, in the course of them wanting to get Cleveland's horses, Ishmael Titus promised to go out and retrieve one of those horses, and while doing so, met the brother coming up with the posse and told them where they were.
Okay.
And so I think that's an interesting story that I found. We're talking about in a time when written records were hard to find, but what an interesting and exciting colorful story of that particular time, especially with Cleveland. Cleveland was a colorful person. He could have been his own story in and of himself. My understanding, he got people enthused because of his size and his voice and his magnetism, and people would just get all, pumped up, especially right before Kings Mountain. They had them all gather around to listen to his speech. What a flamboyant guy.
Yeah,
So
and his men knew that he had their backs. It's just like the Davenport story that we talked about in another episode, where he said it was one of his this William Davenport was one of his favorite soldiers. And while Davenport was out with the militia, some Tories raided his home, traumatized his wife, and actually beat his son and stole some stuff. And when Ben Cleveland caught him, he hung him.
He hung him, right? Side note on that, as we go down rabbit holes, and we tend to do that as we're talking, that son, that young Davenport son, McCall, I believe was the guy's name. McCall told him, "Go feed my horses." And that young Davenport boy, now we're talking boy, said, "Go feed them yourself." So, yeah. And that's why he got beat, because he talked back to the guy, and the guy was a little too full of himself, and beat him, and he paid for it later on.
Yeah.
What interesting stories, man. I appreciate you sharing those with us. This was kind of a new land in many respects. The settlers, you talked about how nature just kind of takes hold up here, and it was unlivable in many respects. I read a story about a Cherokee, it was probably a hunting village or something, and they were looking down into the valley, probably down near the river where 321 crosses over the river down around Hickory, coming up from Hickory going towards Lenore, Connolly Springs, Lenore, that area over there. But they were in their hunting village, and the Cherokee made a comment that, he saw the settlers coming up and starting building in that community. And he was like, oh, we can't live up here in this cold, frigid environment. And y'all are taking over our valleys. And then he just ultimately, there was some big peace meeting that went awry, and then they went on the warpath.
That Nancy Alexander wrote about that in her book, Here Where I Dwell. And it was a story relayed from Sally Scott, a Native American from the 1800s. It was about 100 years old when this story was recorded.
Wow, okay, all right.
And so, yeah, I'm familiar with that story.
And they floated down the river. Is that the story you're talking
No,
about?
that's a separate story.
Okay.
The story that you're talking about, and this is an interesting story as well, is John Perkins' brother, I think his name was Joshua, lived in what's now Alexander County, or the eastern part of Caldwell County.
Okay.
During the Indian raids in the 1760s, they found out about it, and they hopped on a raft. And as they were going down the Catawba River, they were going to Fort Dobbs. As they were going down the river, they had a slave named Henry, and he was so scared of everything. And so as they went, Joshua Perkins said, "Look, be quiet, or I'm going to toss you over the side." So he got quiet. They made it to Fort Dobbs. While Waddell and his rangers were out suppressing the attack from the Indians, Fort Dobbs was actually attacked. And Henry actually killed 2 Indians that were attacking the fort and saved the women. And Joshua Perkins was so impressed that he gave him his freedom.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good.
That was before the Revolutionary
Before the Revolutionary
Yeah, during the Indian Wars.
During the Indian Wars. Okay. All right. So, listen, I appreciate you sitting down with me. Tell our listeners one more time, we're talking about the Trails Through Time, a history of the Blowing Rock area, 1400 to 1900. The site.
Yeah, it's Steve-Sudderth-books.square.site.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate it. I know our listeners have enjoyed listening to you.
Glad to be here, Eric.